Hello and welcome to the Women in Leadership Talk podcast. I hope everyone is having a spectacular day, and we're excited to just add a little more fuel to that day by having Karen Valencic joining us to talk about spiral impact. And we are thrilled to have you here, Karen. So thanks so much for joining us.
Yay, I'm delighted. I'm delighted. Thank you for the opportunity, Vicki.
Well, of course, of
Yeah.
course. And Karen has a great story to share with us today. And so if you have a notepad, just get it out and take a few notes as we're having this conversation. But let me take a moment and just thank our audience for joining us. We really appreciate and value you being here. And we continue to strive to bring wonderful guests that inspire and uplift you. We'd love to hear your feedback. So if this episode resonates with you, please do share it and leave us a review. Let us know how we're doing and share it with your friends. Today, I think we're being listened to in about 50 countries
Wow.
around the world. So we love that. We'd like to continue to grow that and ensure that more people are hearing the voices of our guest. So let's jump in. Let me give you a little bit of feedback about Karen. Karen's journey from corporate engineering to performance improvement expert is as inspiring as it is unconventional. She has a background in mechanical engineering and a career at Delco Remy, a division of General Motors. Karen was one of the first female engineers in her field. So, drawing on her inspiration from her experiences in engineering and her dedication to Aikido, the Japanese art of reconciliation, Karen has developed a system called Spiral Impact. She's also the author of Spiral Impact. And this helps individuals and organizations thrive in the face of conflict and change. Highly recommend picking up her book. I was just sharing with Karen, I read it on a flight to Costa Rica, and she kept my attention the whole time, and I was taking notes like crazy. So we're thrilled and honored to have you here with us today, Karen. So thanks for
Thank
being
you.
here.
Thank you, Vicki. And I'm so happy you enjoyed the book. Tried to make it very readable.
You
Yeah.
did, absolutely. And as I was going through things, I'm like, yes, yes. And so I love that. And I'm really fascinated by Aikido and how what prompted the journey into this, and then how you've related that to leadership and power. So let's let you take over and talk about that with us.
Sure. It was rather serendipitous that I became involved in this in a way. I had read about Aikido many, 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 many years ago in a book by Ram Dass, if your readers are familiar with him. He's a spiritual teacher. And there's a story in there called A Kind Word Turneth Away Wrath. And I'm not going to tell the story, but it's generally about a guy that is on a bus in Japan, and he's studying Aikido, and there's this big disruption that happens, and he's ready to come in and save the day, and which he knows he's not supposed to start fights, but so he's trying to get this guy to focus on him. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, this old Japanese man says, "Hey, what you been drinking?" And it totally diffused the altercation. And it ended up just being this beautiful communion between this old Japanese man and this man that was drunk and really violent at the time. And I was so intrigued with that. And, the guy, it was, Terry Dobson was the author of that story. He says, I got off that bus and I had to sit down and think about what I was practicing. Mm-hmm. But Aikido, for those of you that haven't heard about it, is probably one of the newer martial arts. It evolved back in the mid 1900s in Japan by a man named Morihei Ueshiba. We call him O-sensei, mainly because that means great teacher, which he is. And he's considered by many people to be the finest martial artist that ever lived. I mean, his life was dedicated to it.
Wow.
But midlife, he kind of came to one of these moments where he thought, what I am studying and teaching, this was prior to Aikido, was all about hurting and perhaps even killing people. And he felt like there was a real disconnect with his values because he was a man of community and family. And so he took actually a break and went on a retreat to the mountains. And his quest was to try to find the true martial art. So there's a lot of things written about some mystical experiences he had, but he came back and he said, I've found the true martial art, and it is love. And with
Mm,
that, he went back to the dojo, the place of practice, and he started practicing with a different intention. And
mhm,
I use that word with emphasis because I think it's so important when it comes to conflict. His intention came to be to nurture his attacker's life as well as his own.
mhm,
And so that it informed his practice in a very different way. It came to be called Aikido, which is Aikido, because I is harmony or blending, Ki is energy, and Do is the way of life. And so
wow.
I just was really intrigued with that. And as a woman, I know you focus on women leadership here, but as a woman who grew up with brothers and went to engineering school, I held my own pretty well, but I found myself probably being more of an accommodator than anything when it came to conflict. And of course, there's always that pendulum that swings. So you accommodate, 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 and then it's like, oh, watch out.
I
And
was
I
going to say
realized
that resentment builds.
yeah, right, exactly. And so I at the point in life where I actually was at a dental conference. My kid's dad was in periodontics, and I was at a dental conference in Colorado, and I heard Tom Crum, who wrote the book The Magic of Conflict, and he's an Aikidoist. He presented at that conference, and this was probably 35 years ago. And I have to tell you that when I saw Aikido in action, the world opened up to me. And you can hear about concepts, you can even see concepts, but when you really experience what it's like to stop struggling and what I call spiral and how freeing and liberating that is, it's pretty awesome. And so that really began my study of the actually on the mat with Aikido. And at the same time, I studied with Tom early on and really did his work. And then it evolved into something that's different than what he had originally was teaching. So that was my evolution, and I
Amazing.
continue to evolve with it. So, and I've changed a lot of what I teach over these 30 years because I realize what are concepts that are easy for people to grasp and
Hmm.
actually implement? Because there's a lot of things in conflict that aren't, like I statements.
Hmm.
I statements are, I consider an advanced conflict communication
Hmm.
because it's not natural for most of us. And so
Yes.
but what can we do? So, and the other thing is spirals have such a bad reputation. you know, I hear all the time someone's spiraling, and I'm thinking
Yes.
that's good, but they're referring to something bad. And I'll tell your listeners and your viewers, spirals are so powerful. That's why they get referred to a lot, because once they get going in the wrong direction, it can be devastating. But you understand that, and you can redirect that spiral into a direction in which you want rather than don't want. So that's something I always like to point out to people: is spiral is good. You just
Yeah.
want to make sure you're spiraling in the correct way. So,
Yes. Well, I was just going to say that ties back to your intention, right? That
uh-huh.
you were talking about. And so fascinating when you were talking about, I think it was Ram Dass that, the journey of, going from hurting and killing to love.
Yeah,
And I don't know, Karen, about you, but like one of the things I see with a lot of the clients that I work with is like we all try to avoid conflict, and there's ways to have those conversations that can turn it into something beautiful, just like the example you shared on the bus, right?
right.
Like, and that has to come from intent, though. What is your objective? What is the intention that you're trying um, to achieve?
Right. Exactly. And I talk about intention actually in three levels. And I call it bigger picture, which is what's the outcome I'm looking for. Um, Deeper personal, which is my values and purpose-based intention.
Hmm.
And for me, and when I work with clients, I encourage people to develop their own. But for me, it's to honor myself and others. Now, earlier in my life, it was trying to honor others, and I left myself out of that picture.
Yes.
So,
Yes, we all do,
yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly. And so, and then the third level, or they're not really, they shouldn't really be numbered because they're all equally important, is what are you, in the immediate, what is your intent? And, I have people think about those things. When I work with people, I ask them to identify a conflict. And as we're listening here, your listeners can think about a conflict they have now or one they've had before, and think about what what is it that you want that you don't have
Mhm.
because of that conflict? Because you don't usually have conflict unless you want something to be different. Now,
Mm,
the second part of that that's as important is, what is that intention that doesn't have to do with the other person? And so, I use a simplistic thing about, somebody's habitually late. We can have there's levels of conversations we can have with them, but what happens most often is that we might not say anything. We get annoyed with it. But the
mhm.
fact is if you focus on the fact of what is it you want that you do not have, is I want our clients to be served the minute they walk in the door.
Yeah.
I want the patients to have a good experience with us being ready. I want to arrive so that I'm not frustrated and hassled. And so
Mhm.
those are intense. But so often what happens is we get into this thing of, you are late and you've got to change. And that is true, but it's not a great way around changing things, because typically when people are told something like that, it creates more resistance.
Of course.
And
Yeah.
you just think about in your own life, when you resist, somebody just digs their heels in,
Oh,
even
yeah,
deeper.
it persists. That's for
Right,
sure.
exactly. And so when you make it about yourself, and then maybe ask a question, is, what are your ideas of how we
Yeah.
can make this happen? What do you need to support this? Or, well, do you support it? So so intention is so powerful, and I even take it to the extent of, I love to talk to people,
Mhm.
and sometimes I find myself saying things that are just stupid. No. you know, you know, and I
You
think,
just trying to get a reaction.
what am I saying this for? And when I say, I mean, there's just mundane conversation things, but I kind of think in my mind, it's like, well, what's my intent around sharing that with this person?
Yeah.
And a lot of times I don't share things just because the intent around it is not, it's not really great.
Yeah.
So I think if you stop and pause and think about intent before you speak, and before you write a letter, I think a lot of times we don't think through what is our intention before we
Mhm.
write something, and really being clear on that right up front, so that
Yeah.
people can put into context what we're trying to say.
Well,
So,
that's so interesting you bring that up because that came up recently in a group session
mhm.
that I was having, and one of the young ladies said something about email, and just because the way our world has shifted, we use a lot of text, we use a lot of email, and oftentimes, and this is just my perspective, Karen, I'd love to hear yours,
Yeah,
we will hide behind that, right?
right.
And because we don't want to have the face to face. But to your point, if you're not thinking about that intention, and then how does that impact,
Right,
right? What are
right.
you trying to do? But then how is it actually impacting the other party? That I think that's where a lot of that push and pull comes from.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And in
yeah,
the example that you just gave too, oftentimes we will jump to conclusions. So the person being late, right? And we're all about, why are you not here? This is my time, or our client's time. But it's what's causing that person to be late. And
yeah.
and so really understanding, is it just a habitual pattern with the
Right,
person? Do
right.
they, they're trying to drop their kid off at daycare and they get caught in traffic?
Right.
Like, so asking so that we really understand what's happening.
Well, and I think too, Vicky, that as leaders, when we give feedback, we
Mm.
often begin with our view of what's happening and maybe some data that we have of what's happening. But really the best place to begin is asking the person, what is your experience around this? Because, because exactly as you said, we are making some conclusions based upon our own worldview of what must be going on. And if people are anything like me, sometimes I just realize that my worldview and others' worldview is just so different.
Yeah.
It's so, so different. And it's fascinating, I think. So,
It
yeah.
is fascinating, and I love that you frame it that way, because if you can pause long enough to
Right.
really step back and look at the situation, there are often reasons for that.
Yeah.
And before you react, you might want to level set a little bit so that you can respond in a way to encourage a conversation and find out what's the real crux of the matter that's happening.
Right. Right. Yeah. And it's interesting, Vicki, I don't know if you've experienced this as well, but what I find when I work in organizations is there'll be something that happens and people will make conclusions about it
Oh
based
yeah.
upon the best information they have. And because oftentimes I'm involved very deeply, I know what's actually happening. Of course, I can't talk to it, but almost always people are concluding the wrong things.
Mhm.
It's just it's just the wrong things. And so I notice that with myself when I watch someone's behavior, I be really cautious on making sure that I'm not making some conclusion that is based upon my stuff, not anything that's in reality. So yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point, Karen. I see it as well.
Mhm.
Um, and you'll even, just an example that popped in my head when you were saying that is oftentimes you'll hear leaders, especially, they'll say, oh, we need to really work on our culture, our people culture, people first. And then yet they'll turn around and they'll make a policy that says something completely counter to what they're trying to actually reinforce. And so it's taking that step back and asking those questions of, so when you set the policy that, no one can work from home at
Right.
all,
Yeah.
what message are you actually sharing?
Yeah.
Right. And this came up recently with a client that I had, where they were really having difficulty culturally,
Hmm.
and part of it was the policies they were putting in place, because on one side we were saying, we've got to build trust amongst our teams, and then yet we were putting policies in place that were completely counterproductive.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It happens a lot. Happens
It
a lot.
does.
And yeah, and I work a lot of times when I work with a team, I'll guide them to create what I call as a credo, which is really about how they work together. And and I notice I always have them do that in the form of yes or no questions.
Mm,
Because so many organizations have on the wall, we value trust, we value
mm.
collaboration, all those things, but those are empty statements. And so I have them in the form of questions because the questions beg an answer. The questions beg an answer. So, can you trust me?
Yeah.
That's a question. And when teams can create that in terms of which they value around those questions and then take time to have conversation around them, it really opens up some beautiful dialogue and understanding. So,
Absolutely.
yeah, yeah,
Yes, I love that. I
yeah,
love that, because you're right. That's the stepping stone to
yeah.
creating a trusting environment.
Right. Precisely.
Yeah.
Precisely. Yeah. Yeah.
So Karen, what happens, like, and I love how you've taken the Aikido and you incorporate that into the work that you're doing.
Yes.
And so we see leaders, whether they're political, corporate, even in our academia, like, oftentimes using force to gain results, and that can have a short-term impact. But what really happens on the longer game of things?
Well, I think you can see it. People get discouraged. They opt out. They feel squashed. They all of those things. And I really like going back again to the image of a spiral, which actually that comes from Aikido. Aikido is all spirals. I shouldn't say all spirals, but mostly spirals. And I liken the analogy is if my challenge is to put two boards together, my two most common layman options are a hammer and a nail, or a
Mm,
screw and a screwdriver. Now think about it. Force is the hammer and nail. It's a linear process. You have to do it over, 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 and over again. And oftentimes you don't get a good result. And if you miss your mark a little bit, people get hurt. And so it's not an effective. And if anyone that has a wooden deck, they can, let's see, anyone that has a wooden deck can verify this in the springtime. I just had some work done on my deck, and if it's put together with nails, they pop up. It's not a
yes.
long-term thing. But if you use a spiral, a nail or a screw and a screwdriver, it's rotational. So you're covering much more surface area and you get a much better connection. And when you subject that to the elements of time, temperature, vibration, moisture, you keep your holding power better than with a nail. And so force, a story that just to illustrate that in real time, and a lot of times you think about force, it doesn't have to be force as you might be thinking of it. I was speaking at a conference, and as I was checking into the hotel, there was a small group of people in front of me. And this one young woman, she was just so angry at her boss. She was
Mm,
just going on and on. Well, here's what the issue was. She was there to take photographs of what they were presenting at this conference. He told her what he wanted.
mm,
Now, that may not seem like force, but when he told her what he wanted, she heard, I don't trust your judgment.
yeah.
And so what ended up happening here, she's talking to all of her colleagues about this, and she's feeling very disenfranchised. Now, I think a leader that's really wanting to engage and grow and bring out the best in their people is going to say, hey, Beth, so excited you're going to be handling the photography. I'd like to know, what do you think are the things that
Mm,
you should really catch to really do our business well? And then she's activating her mind and thinking of things. And then, the leader can always say, those are great ideas. And also if she misses something, then you can add those in. But when
exactly.
you start with, and again, that may not seem like force, but micromanagement really is. And so those are things when you're telling somebody something, and certainly sometimes that feels like a shortcut because it's the most expedient thing. But in the long run, that shortcut in that situation really created discontent with a person that could be really highly engaged. And
Mhm.
so, and then that discontent she's sharing with all her colleagues. Now, this was a 5 minute exchange I witnessed, so I don't know the realities of any of those other things, but I've certainly witnessed other types of situations where people just want to be heard and acknowledged and valued for what they contribute, and they
Yeah,
don't even have to have what they want. They just want to feel valued.
yeah.
And so that's the whole thing with force versus power. And power, this is my engineer coming out in me. Power is rotational. So, you might think people are in a position of power, which maybe they are, but if they're being dominant, they're using force as a mechanism.
Yeah,
And so anyone at any lot in life can own their own power. That's a matter of how you go about doing things.
yeah,
So that's really something that I think is a misnomer. And in my martial arts practice, it's actually interesting because somebody that's smaller and more petite actually can generate more power than someone that's really big. So just because you have this psychological or physical or positional illusion of power, that's not necessarily what you're stuck with.
yeah.
So
Oh, I
yeah.
love that.
Yeah.
And I love the analogy you used with the nail and hammer and the screw and screwdriver because that really resonated and brought that
Yeah.
home, right? And you having power is a privilege.
Yeah.
right? And so how you use that becomes so important. I don't know if you've ever read Force versus Power by
Oh, I
David
have.
Hawkins.
I have.
Oh, such a
Yeah.
fantastic book.
Yeah.
And, when you use that force, you are sucking the vitality away. And
Yeah.
so I love how you've described that and how you relate that to Aikido and the
Yeah.
practice.
Yeah. 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 And what I've tried to do with the because Aikido is a beautiful art to watch, but I find that sometimes people can watch the art and it's beautiful, but really being able to apply it to
Mm,
life can be a little tricky. And I've even talked to some people that have studied Aikido for a long time, and they've said, I never thought about applying it to my life, which is fascinating to me. But the model I put together, Spiral Impact, is a way that this is my engineer in me again, is a way that I have figured, how do I make this so that people can not just think that's a great idea, but how do
mhm,
you do it? And
mhm,
so, as you know, Vicki, I've created what I call four quadrants, and
mhm.
the 30,000 view of those are, one of them is around knowledge, and of course, there's lots around that, but it's around that asking questions and
Yeah.
learning aspect about everything, whether it's something you're working on or your person, the other people you're working with, your team, all that stuff. There's also what I call focused energy, and that's an incredibly important item, which in my work we talk about centering.
Mhm.
And centering in the martial arts is that it's that point that's about an inch and a half below your navel. But it's actually a mind, body, spirit, emotional aspect that really incorporates all the things that have become popular with emotional intelligence and mindfulness, but it's something that you can physically practice. I can take people through exercises where they can actually just shift their focus, and it puts them more in their own power. So that's really a huge part of this, and that's where in a spiral, for example, a hurricane or a tornado,
Mhm.
there's a really calm center, and the more calm and the more defined that center is, the more power there is in that hurricane or tornado. Same as with us, as we can get more dropped into our center. And I love the fact that the world seems to be seeing that. Businesses seem to be seeing the relevance of that. And so that's the center of the spiral. The knowledge piece is the turning aspect of the spiral to continue to learn. And then the intention is what gives it direction.
Mm.
And so those three components are the real aspects of spiral impact. And of course, the fourth quadrant is support. What do you do to support all that? But yeah, it's really, it's just so fun to see experience when people realize they don't have to work so hard at
Yes,
anything,
exactly.
and that I think that's our culture. And I also observe that most people come to work and they've learned their conflict skills through their families,
Mm.
the media, and our entertainment. And
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but the last time I've turned on my TV, there's a lot of dysfunctional conflict happening.
Oh
And
boy.
it might be entertaining, but it's not something that I want in my life. I don't want that in my life. So,
Exactly, Karen.
um,
I'm so
yes,
with you on that. So
yes,
at
yeah,
some point you have to ask yourself like entertainment, but it also solidifies in your mind, right? Like that's how you show up and behave, and that's just not good in
yeah.
any way.
Yeah, because our media can glorify something dysfunctional, and then we think that's how we should emulate the world.
It
And
is.
I mean, I think of when my daughters were growing up, we used to watch Friends a lot, and there's a lot of little memes in there that are kind of really derogatory, but they come with the characters, you know.
Yeah.
So
Very,
anyway,
very true. Very
uh-huh.
true. So be careful what you're putting in.
Right,
Is what
exactly,
right? But
exactly.
when you were talking about the four quadrants, I mean, you know, what was going through my mind there is it's the presence, right? Like so when you relate that the quadrants to leadership,
Yeah,
and leadership being how you're showing up in the world,
yeah,
that becomes really important to your presence and what you're able to assimilate, take in, right? Because if you're like in this spin, not the
Yeah,
spiral, but if you're not really paying attention, or you're not really fully there, you're not
yeah,
centered, you
yeah,
can't really take in everything. And so the practice that you're just talking about helps you, I think, to become more aware of what's
yeah,
around you so you can be more intentional.
exactly. We call that the wobble.
The wobble.
The
Okay.
wobble. We call it the wobble. Yeah, we call it the wobble, and it absolutely does make. Yeah, they all of these things all fit beautifully together. They all fit beautifully together, and it might be worthwhile just mentioning, what is conflict, because
Yes.
and while before I address that, I was doing some writing recently. So if you read what I write, you'll be reading this soon. But um, I've noticed a couple headlines in the news this year. One is that we need to embrace more conflict in the workplace. I'm
Mm,
ad-libbing that, but that was from
mhm,
William Ury, who is the co-author of Getting to Yes from the Harvard Negotiation Project, which is a classic book.
mhm,
And that contrasts with another quote that the chief human resource officer at SHRM, so we're talking human resource officer for the Society of Human Resources, he said the disruption and the sacrifice that people are experiencing at work because of incivility must be a wake up call for employers. And so
mm,
you can see both sides of that issue of
mhm.
conflict. One person's encouraging you got to have conflict, the other one's saying, wait a minute, this is destructive. Now, for me, that's just like those both are true. The thing is that people have got to realize there's a difference in conflict. Conflict can be destructive or it can be productive, and I call
Mhm.
it conflict mastery. But I define conflict as if you want to take your hands and make fists and push them together, this is conflict. That's force. And what makes this destructive or creative is if you push too long, too hard, or too fast for the people involved, it becomes destructive.
Yeah.
And so what I teach people is the moment you have that touch, you shift. And so it's you go here, you you have that tension, and then you spiral. And but you've got to have the tension too for creativity. And
Yeah.
that's what William Ury is telling us is we've got to have the conflict. And what I think Jim Link was the SHRM HR chief. He was referring to the fact that you've got this incivility that's happening that keeps going on and on and on, and it's really destructive. So we need to understand and be really creative and master conflict because it's something that will occur, it must occur, and we might as well, I shouldn't say we might as well, to be our best selves we need to learn how do we shift it from the disruption destruction to something that's productive.
Productive.
And
Yeah.
it's not that difficult. I mean, I say that I've worked on this 30 years and sometimes I still get in conflict, but if you understand what conflict is,
Yes.
it becomes a fascinating study. I answered one of the questions on LinkedIn recently that was, how does a leader know they're doing good work?
Mm.
My answer to that was they have people disagreeing.
Mhm.
Because if you have people that are not all in agreement, that means
Mhm.
you've created a space for people to speak
Yes.
and be
Absolutely.
considered. And again, you think back on force. It's like we got to get this done. We got to get this done. And the fact is that can be very counterproductive because
Yeah.
you're excluding people and you're missing things when you do that. So
Yeah, totally agree with you, Karen. I mean, that's a big one, whether it's a corporation, government, like you see it, right? Like when
oh,
people disagree, that's an opportunity
yeah, yeah,
to create something even better.
uh-huh.
And conflict, it happens in all aspects of our lives. And
Yes,
so to your point of learning how to navigate that in a way to, not do no harm is how I would look at that. Do no harm, and how do you make it more productive? What do you
Right.
learn from it? So get really curious
Yeah.
about why somebody's coming from the position that they're coming from.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's an interesting and I would say not easy thing to navigate
Yeah.
because you have to practice. You have to build muscles to
Right.
do that.
Right. When I say easy, it's not easy. It's the concepts are simple. They're not
Yes,
easy.
exactly.
That's what is true. And a lot of times I will find that I'll hear people say, "Well, I'm not going to even talk to that person because they will never change."
Yes,
And
yes, I hear it too repeatedly.
and so my response to that is, and it gets back to the intention piece, which is, well, so what's your intention? Is your intention speaking to them to get them to change, or to be open for the best solution?
Yeah,
And I think we all have to take kind of a hard look at ourselves um, to really understand what is our intention.
yeah.
And I know, oh gosh, I was listening to a podcast over the weekend, and there was a famous Nobel laureate whose name leaves me. Daniel starts with a K, last name starts with a K, but he said, "I love to be proven wrong because I like to be surprised."
Oh, that's lovely.
And when I'm surprised, I know I'm learning. And
Hmm.
I love that quote.
That is
I like to
fabulous.
be proven wrong because I like to be survived or
Yeah,
surprised. And when I'm surprised, I know I'm learning. So,
yeah.
and yeah,
That's a beautiful framing of how to even look at life because so many of us are working so hard to be right.
right,
And right can be you're right but not somebody else's right or in that situation, but that's a beautiful way to express.
exactly.
So Karen, I am cognizant of our timing.
Okay.
um, you know what, this is like such a fabulous conversation, and I love talking about this,
I
especially
do
the
too.
communication. Yes. But just to leave our audience with something powerful that they could try today, what would be maybe one thing that you would want to leave them with?
You gave me a little warning you were going to ask me this question, and I thought a lot about it. And at different times, I would say different things. But I'm so you know I I think that the thing to go out and do today is to be quiet and observe.
Mm,
Observe when you're feeling tension. Observe what others are doing, and just become a master observer of people's interactions. And notice that whole thing where I talked about pushing the hands
mhm,
together.
mhm.
Notice, when do you feel that tension, and what's going on there? What's going on there for you? And what would happen if you let that go? And so to me, it's that self-awareness is such an important first step, because you can't do anything until you create that own awareness in yourself. And as full self-disclosure, that takes diligent work and practice. And actually
100%.
having a practice is so important. And it's not something that one day that you just all of a sudden get it. It's a process.
Yeah.
And certain situations are easier than others to do that. So,
Yeah.
what I would say to your listeners, to our listeners, really become the observer. I've taught this work in college course, and one of the first assignments that I would give my students is to go out in the world and look at conflicts and tell me which are functional, which are dysfunctional.
Yeah.
Just look at what's happening, and what about that? What's happening that's functional there?
Oh,
And
that's a great
what,
one. I
what
love that.
what would it look like if you're not? And then, if you find that you have, you get this conflict, just notice what you do in your body.
Yeah.
Because I think that until you really connect with yourself, that everything's going to be about other people. And the
Yeah.
fact is and that's something I'd like to tell people is, so often in my courses, people will say, so and so needs to take this. And
Mm,
it's like, when you look at it, takes two to push together, and only one person needs to make a change to change the system.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly. That's very powerful.
yeah.
So,
So
Karen, where can people find you if they have more questions?
yeah. Well, great place is my website, KarenValencic.com or spiralimpact.com. And I also I put stuff on YouTube and I'm active on LinkedIn. But I also would love to tell your listeners that I've just recently has launched a membership site. And in that site, it's a subscription that goes month to month, and I have a video course that's just goes through this bit by bit. It builds on each other, and there's
Nice.
a community of conversation. And I will be showing up live once a week on Zoom to answer questions, add more content, whatever the community wants. And so this is a new thing. Um, and I'm excited about it because
Awesome.
I'd really like to share this message more in a profound way. And people can earn their blue belt certificate by completing that coursework. So that's what's happening with me. Yeah,
Awesome. Awesome. So
yeah,
you heard it live from Karen
yeah,
directly.
yeah,
And, you know, you can work at your own pace and also be able to connect with her on a weekly basis.
yeah.
So, Karen, thank you so much for being here today. This has been a fantastic conversation. I'm very passionate about the work you're doing because my work is very similar with regards to communication and how we, you know, have difficult conversations and turn them into productive conversations.
Yeah.
And we're super grateful to have you. So, thanks for being here.
Yeah. I so appreciate it, Vicki. This has been
Oh,
fun.
yes, our
Yeah.
pleasure.
Yeah. Thank you.
And thank you, audience, for being here. We know you have a choice as to what podcast you listen to. So thank you. Give us feedback. Let us know what your thoughts are. And if you're interested in learning more about your own leadership style, join us at Will Empowered, and that's one L. WILEMPOWERED, and take our free leadership quiz. It'll just give you some insight as to how you're showing up as a leader and where you might want to focus some energy and some attention. So thank you everyone for being here. Have a fabulous week and we will see you at our next Will Talk podcast. Take care. Thank you again, Karen.
Thank you. Thank you.